Look, this is the only woman in the Russian cosmonaut corps, Anna Kikina. On October 5, 2022, she was the first Russian to reach the International Space Station on a private SpaceX flight. Anna's excitement is understandable. Crew Dragon has a roomy common area, large screens for Earth communication, and spacesuits resembling those from Star Wars. Today, not only professional astronauts can make such a journey. The first fully commercial tourist flight to the International Space Station in history took place just over a year ago. The mission was called SpaceX AX-1, and its commander was Michael Lopez Alegria, a former National Aeronautics and Space Administration astronaut. He has 3 shuttle flights and 1 Soyuz flight under his belt, as well as 10 spacewalks, which is a record for the United States. He is now the vice president of Axiom Space, the company that organized the mission. And here are his paying companions on the spacecraft, each of whom paid $55 million. Pilot Larry Connor from the United States, as well as 2 mission specialists, Eitan Stibbe from Israel and Mark Pathy from Canada. All 3 are private astronauts, entrepreneurs, and investors. On board, they didn't just admire the vastness of space. They created a program of experiments totaling 100 hours, about 12 hours a day, in collaboration with their respective national space agencies, scientific, and business partners. What happens if you calculate the economics? For transporting the mission commander on the Crew Dragon spacecraft, Axiom Space paid SpaceX the same $55 million. Plus, the company paid a little over $1 million according to National Aeronautics and Space Administration's price list for training, use of ground infrastructure, and the stay of 4 astronauts on the American segment of the International Space Station. The implementation of the AX-2 mission, during which the second fully commercial tourist flight to the International Space Station in history will take place, will begin 13 months after the first mission. The SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket, with the Crew Dragon spacecraft carrying 4 people on board, will launch from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida on May 9. This crew will spend 10 days on the International Space Station. They will conduct just over 20 research experiments, spending about 130 hours in the National Laboratory, said Joel Montalbano, Director of National Aeronautics and Space Administration as International Space Station Program. As with the AX-1 mission, the new crew will be led by a former National Aeronautics and Space Administration astronaut. This time, the commander is Peggy Whitson, who has spent 665 days in space during her astronaut career, more than any other American. She will be joined by 2 astronauts from Saudi Arabia, Rayana Barnawi and Ali Al-Karni. Barnawi will become the first woman from Saudi Arabia to travel to space. Entrepreneur John Schaffner became a crew member and the pilot of the AX-2 mission, and the next, 3rd commercial mission to the International Space Station is already planned. National Aeronautics and Space Administration has signed a contract with Axiom Space, under which it will be carried out. The exact start date of the AX-3 mission has not yet been determined, but it is expected that the next group of space tourists will be able to go into orbit no earlier than November 2023. A crew of 4 will spend 14 days aboard the International Space Station, during which they will interact with the station's crew members and participate in a number of experiments. Now, let's continue with the topic of our episode and see how space tourism began. If we rewind about 20 years, we can see that the era of space tourism started with the American Dennis Tito. He flew to the International Space Station in 2001 and paid a huge sum of $20 million for the trip on the Russian Soyuz. The money was supposed to go toward repairing the Mir station. By the way, he enjoyed it so much that he has already bought 2 tickets for himself and his wife for a planned flight to the moon on the SpaceX Starship. If everything goes according to plan, the 82-year-old American could set a record as the oldest person ever to participate in an orbital flight, not to mention a flight to the moon. The second pilot was Mark Shuttleworth. He flew to the International Space Station on April 25 and returned to Earth on May 5, 2002. And already on October 1, 2005, American businessman Gregory Olson launched to the International Space Station. On September 18th, 2006, Anousheh Ansari, the first female space tourist and an American of Iranian descent, traveled to space. Until the very end, she remained the backup for Japanese businessman Daisuke Kayanamoto, but he was not allowed to fly due to health problems. On April 7, 2007, space revealed its secrets to the American billionaire of Hungarian origin, Bill Gates' right-hand man, Charles Simonyi. Experiments were planned for him at the request of the European Space Agency. Simonyi conducted research on the effects of weightlessness on blood and the impact of radiation on the human body. In 2009, Guy Laliberté, the founder and head of the Canadian Circus, went to space. He is the last person to have made the flight to date from a government organization. Before him was the businessman Richard Garriott. In 2021, the era of paired flights to the International Space Station began, starting with Yulia Peresild and Klim Shipenko. The first film duo in history visited orbit in October 2021. A month later, Japanese billionaire Yusaku Maezawa and his assistant Yozo Hirano went to the International Space Station. Paired flights have become cheaper. According to rough estimates, they cost about 10% less than individual ones, but the amount is still astronomical. Just think about it. For the Japanese man, the space trip cost $88 million. And next year, another paired flight is planned at $40 million per person. This same Japanese man, who is passionate about space, bought all the seats for the debut tourist cruise around the moon from SpaceX. According to plans from 5 years ago, Elon Musk's company was going to send tourists to the moon in 2023, but the timeline will most likely be pushed back a bit. Meanwhile, billionaire Yusaku Maezawa, who made his fortune with an online clothing store, has already selected 8 creative individuals from around the world to join him on this flight. Not long ago, these people were officially introduced. Joining the eccentric Japanese man on the flight will be Steve Aoki, a popular American disc jockey producer and electronic music performer. Tim Dodd, a blogger from the United States and creator of the space-themed YouTube channel Everyday Astronaut. Yemi Ade, an artist and choreographer from the Czech Republic. Karim Ilya, a photographer from the United Kingdom. Rhiannon Adam, an award-winning Irish photographer. Brandon Hall, a documentary filmmaker from the United States. Dev Joshi, an Indian actor and blogger. Choi Sin-hyun, a South Korean rapper, model, and actor. 2 backup participants in the project are Miyu, a dancer from Japan, and Kathleen Farrington, an American snowboarder. There are other options for astronomically wealthy people to get into space. Jeff Bezos' company, Blue Origin, successfully completed its 6th flight with space tourists on board a drone rocket in August 2022. Exact prices are not publicly disclosed, but it is known that the most expensive ticket was purchased for $28 million compared to the prices for Soyuz. It's not much, but for an ordinary person, it's still astronomical, especially considering that the flight will last only 10 minutes. Yes, it's not even a tour. It's more like a sightseeing excursion above the Earth. Another American company, Virgin Galactic, is also aiming to become a budget space carrier. A 1-hour flight on its ship, with the simple name Spaceship Two, that is, Spaceship Two, costs just $450,000 by space standards. For this money, each of the 6 passengers will get a view from the window and 6 minutes of weightlessness. Among the first tourists was the company's founder, Richard Branson. But calling this journey a space flight is quite a stretch. No rockets or detachable stages, just reaching the required speed of Mach 3, which is about 2,500 kilometers per hour. The carrier aircraft accelerates the spaceplane, after which Spaceship Two independently reaches an altitude of 86 kilometers, and the regular plane lands on the runway. Strictly speaking, this isn't space, but a suborbital flight. The Chinese aren't falling behind either. A veteran of China's space industry and founder of the private company Cast Space, chief rocket designer Yana Qian, announced that the country's first suborbital tourist flight will take place no later than 2025. It is reported that suborbital tourism in China will flourish and become cheaper than the offerings of American companies Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic. Meanwhile, The Japanese have decided to send tourists on space balloons. A young company has started accepting applications for participation in tourist tours on a high-altitude balloon. A two-seat capsule will deliver the pilot and one tourist to an altitude of 25 kilometers. You can feel like a quarter of an astronaut for a relatively modest sum of about $180,000. As the project develops, prices are expected to drop significantly. So, they also plan to make space flights accessible to a wide range of people. Of course, all of this isn't exactly spaceflight. According to the classification of the International Aeronautical Federation, space begins at an altitude of 100 kilometers. But for an ordinary person, even a suborbital flight costs an astronomical amount of money. How can we make space more accessible? It makes the most sense to try to save on getting to orbit, since that's the most expensive part of space travel. One way to save money is to make rockets lighter, and you can do that by simply 3D printing them. This technology already exists and was developed in the United States. Two different printers work together. One creates individual parts by sintering metal powder with a laser, and the other assembles the finished parts into a single whole. The process takes just 60 days. For comparison, building the same SpaceX rocket that Russian cosmonaut Kikina flew to orbit on takes at least a year. Very soon, the creators of the technology want to start mass-producing rockets, so it won't be long to wait. Space flights will become much cheaper, but the price will still be quite high. We assemble rockets 10 times faster. Thanks to this speed, the cost will decrease significantly, and each subsequent version will increase the speed, further reducing expenses. This works extremely powerfully. Rockets will keep getting cheaper, said Tim Ellis, the founder and chief executive officer of the rocket company. Just recently, the first 3D printed and the first methane-fueled launch vehicle, Terran 1, launched from a site in Florida as part of the Good Luck Have Fun mission. Unfortunately, there were problems with the second stage engine, and the rocket did not reach orbit. But nevertheless, it can be said with full confidence that the Relativity Space Team achieved tremendous success today and proved to the whole world that rockets printed on a 3D printer will be exploring the universe in the very near future. There is another way to reduce delivery costs, of course, but for now it is still more theoretical than fully calculated economically and engineering-wise. This approach is connected to the promising SpaceX Starship rocket by Elon Musk. Currently, each astronaut accounts for several tons of spacecraft mass, which of course increases the cost. Plus, if a long stay on a space station is planned, you also have to pay for it by the hour of stay. For the International Space Station, for example, it would be about $15,000 per person per hour. In theory, you could fit about 500 seats inside Starship, similar to an airliner. And then the mass of the passengers would reach about half of the payload mass. In this case, you can fairly optimistically estimate the ticket price for a short stay in space at $3,000. However, these people would still need housing, possibly on a theoretical low-cost orbital station for ordinary people, costing a few $100s per hour. Will there be demand for flights at such a price? Various models estimate passenger traffic in these conditions, but they all agree overall. The demand will reach tens and hundreds of thousands of launches per year. To sum up, today each of us can see in real time how passenger space travel as a whole is becoming an active industry. And as in any industry, when competition comes in, quality improves and prices go down. And here, experts distinguish three phases of the development of the space industry. The first phase is the one we are in right now. You could say it's a touch of space. First and foremost, it's the opportunity to visit space for a considerable amount of money. The second phase is the creation of space hotels in orbit. There, you'll be able to fly for a week and truly experience space, eat, sleep, and feel weightlessness. The third phase is seen as more of a fantasy now, but after the second stage, it will become almost attainable. A professional settlement in orbit and on the moon. We're talking about living in space for more than a week, in the boldest fantasies. This can be expected as early as 2042, 2050. There is also a fourth phase, but that one definitely looks like something out of science fiction movies. Their example is a good way to dream about the future of humanity. A space elevator, which Tsiolkovsky once envisioned. Recently, Japanese scientists announced that they plan to build one by 2050. Simply stretch a cable from Earth to the Moon's orbit and send a cabin along it. Until now, this technology was considered unrealistic. There simply wasn't a material strong enough for the cable. The Japanese are planning to solve the problem using graphene nanotubes. Take a look at this footage, showing how this material floats in the air. It's several times stronger than steel, but also very light. It could potentially be the best material ever made by humans, able to withstand the stresses of space. Of course, in the current reality, it seems like the Japanese are just chasing impossible dreams. But humanity has always started this way, with a dream of one achievement or another. In the first episode of the series, Foundation on Apple Television, terrorists destroy the Galactic Empire's space elevator. A space elevator connecting the surface of Trantor to a huge station where everyone arriving in the capital world lands. The terrorist attack that destroyed this monumental structure undermined the authority of the Empire, left a huge scar on the planet's surface, and also signed the death sentence for the planets whose capitals were burned by orbital bombardments. Why does the dream of such a structure excite the minds of dreamers so much? People like to send all sorts of things beyond Earth's atmosphere. Thanks to this, we have the International Space Station weather satellites, Global Positioning System satellites, and the James Webb Telescope. However, so far, our only way to launch anything into space is to attach it to a device that provides controlled chemical explosions. We call such devices rockets. That's cool, but it's also expensive and inefficient. Lifting a kilogram of cargo to low Earth orbit costs an astronomical amount of money. What if, instead of launching an object on a chemical rocket, you could simply lift it on a cable going straight into space? Would that be possible? With a space elevator, let's say we build a giant tower. 400 kilometers tall, you could just take the elevator to the top floor and step out into space. But actually, no. First of all, it's impossible to build such a structure out of steel. Its weight would simply crush the lower parts. Besides, it would require too much material. But that's not even the biggest problem. Let's remember that being in orbit requires a high speed. If you were standing on top of a 400-kilometer tower with its base resting on the equator, you would be moving. Since the planet is rotating, it's similar to the movement of a person standing on the edge of a carousel. If it's not possible to build a tower standing on the Earth, we can hang a cable 36,000 kilometers long from an object located in geostationary orbit. It might seem like the space elevator is ready, but for that, there needs to be a large mass in orbit, a space station or a small asteroid. The mass needs to be large so that objects climbing up the cable don't pull it down from orbit. Perhaps the problem with this design is obvious. Who needs a cable that's 36,000 kilometers long? A cable of that length, even if made from the strongest material like Kevlar, would have to be extremely thick to avoid breaking. And the thicker the cable, the heavier its lower part becomes, which means the upper part has to be even thicker. A problem like this seems fundamentally unsolvable. The only hope left is to find some very light and strong material in the future, like carbon nanotubes. Maybe we will be able to build something like this, but not today. Just don't forget about safety. In the first episode, a group of people decides to set off explosions that separate the upper station of the space elevator from the cable. The cable falls to the planet's surface and causes serious destruction. What would a falling space cable look like in reality? It's not easy to simulate something like that, but we can roughly imagine what it would look like in a model. The cable wraps around a third of the equator, but a full cable would almost completely wrap around the Earth, since the length of its equator is 40,000 kilometers. For now, these are just scenes from Isaac Asimov's science fiction universe, adapted for the screen on Apple Television. And in our current reality, space tourists continue to travel into space on giant barrels filled with explosive materials. Interestingly, Those who have already been to space don't like the term space tourist itself because it portrays them as idle observers, even though in reality each of them participates in various scientific experiments. Richard Garriott suggested calling himself a private astronaut, while Mark Shuttleworth called himself a pioneer of commercial space travel. National Aeronautics and Space Administration and Roscosmos use the term spaceflight participant, and Russian cosmonaut Maxim Surayev called Guy Laliberté an expedition participant. Would you like to go to space? And how much would you be willing to spend to make it happen? Maybe very soon, a much wider range of ordinary people will be able to afford to study and explore something in space. Write in the comments what you think about this. Thank you for watching and see you in future episodes on our channel.